of the temporary position, if I understand our system well enough. So are you bracing us for the fact that 2018 there will be some real cost associated with this position that is not in the budget in 2017?
Through Mr. Mayor, that would be correct, that we would anticipate there'd be the full-time benefit costs that would be applied to that.
In next year's budget, 2018. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wells to the motion. Okay, I'll address that as soon as we're finished dealing with this item. Thank you. Any further discussions on the motion? If not, those in favor? That's carried. Back to you, Councillor Wells.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask the Chief to speak to item number 2, the impact of council-approved initiative for 2016 for an increased volunteer firefighter complement of $20,000, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through our budgeting and capital in the fall, that was a council-approved initiative that gave permission for us to hire 12 additional firefighters, 2 per station in our rural areas. Just to further, Mr. Mayor, it's just the advertising and recruiting will start this June, but it won't take effect until the 2018.
Mayor, my last one would be reduced contribution from the Water Capital Replacement Reserve Fund in the amount of $292,000. Does that mean that we have a saving of $292,000?
Through the chair, we'll let finance answer that, but it's no. My understanding is it was through the water side of the business, and now was being taken from them and set on the fire side. So it's off of one group and onto another group, Councillor Wells. There's no savings there.
So we are reducing the fire budget by $292,000, transferring it over to the water side, which will get an increase of $292,000.
No, the other way around, coming from the water side to the fire department.
In other words, instead of being paid out of the water and wastewater users, it'll be paid out of the general tax levy by all contributors. Continue, Councillor Wells.
That's a pretty big increase.
Yes, it is.
And because of the size of that increase of $292,000, when I look at the bottom here and see that the 9.6 increases that make up for the major portion of the 9.6% increase.
That is correct. In my opening explanation, the net financing did hit us. I won't use it. It had a negative impact on our budget, and a big chunk of it is shown right here in the fire services for that item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish you'd bring better news, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wells. Columbus and then Brunton.
Yes, page 490, going to materials and supplies, maintenance and repair supplies under that column. Talks about an increase in the budget of $17,300. What? I suppose you can pull it up on the monitor here, but what is mostly driving that $17,300 increase at 37.8%?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we had the opportunity to relocate some money from back in the fall on the capital side. We have the day-to-day repairs out of the fire stations that we didn't really categorize in that capital plan. So what we asked with our finance colleagues is to move $2,500 per station into that line there to accommodate the day-to-day things that we may experience throughout the year, which is almost $14,000.
So that's day-to-day kind of maintenance and repair items, miscellaneous type.
Broken toilets, yeah, repairs.
Do you actually need that much on an annual basis?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, tough to measure. We have breakdowns some years, and other years were great. So we just try to get a base amount to start.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Brunton?
Could I look at contracted services, please?
Yes, you may. If we could get staff to blow that $363,500 item up, we'll have a look. Let's take a second here.
On the through you, Mayor Luke, to the chief, courier services, what does that involve? Like, you running things, I assume some between halls and all that, but it's quite a bit of money there. I just wonder, what's that involve?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have a courier service as part of the county that we got into a couple of years ago, that we have delivery to the fire stations twice a week. And the reason we did that is to eliminate the district chiefs or firefighters driving in from the various stations to pick up and receive goods.
Okay, and can we break down the contracted services for that 5,500? That
Through you, Mr. Mayor, some of the contracted service that we're finding for next year is the CO calibration and the pest control. Contracts have been added for all 11 stations, and that is approximately $14,000.
This disaster planning, who's going to, I see that's a $5,300. Do you have a disaster plan? How does that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be on our portable emergency generator testing and maintenance.
Disaster planning, is that a consultant or something, or no? Like, what is it a plan for? Do you have to draw up a plan? And you have emergency responses for 180,000. That seems to be a very fixed figure. Is that for like when they go out on a call or something, or how does that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is for emergency planning for the county. It's under our EOC and our disaster plan.
180,000? Oh, the first one I asked. Okay, well, disaster planning, that's what you refer to?
That's correct. That's for emergency management for the county.
But what does it involve? Like, do you have a plan in place? Like, you're going to spend $5,300. What does that go to? Where is it actually spent?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have emergency generators that are underneath that, our emergency evacuation centers, which are covered under our disaster planning as well.
These are costs, like, to upgrade the generators or replace them, or?
This is the, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's the maintenance contract for our emergency generators.
Okay, I see. All right. And how many of them do you have?
2.
And it's $5,300, or is that a portion of that $5,300 that costs to maintain them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the contract is $2,400 for each one.
Really? For a generator? That's $200 a month per generator. These are like a standby generator that run all your facilities? You said that's...
Through you, Mr. Mayor, one is for our Port Rowan portable, and the other one is our newer portable we bought a couple of years ago that would be towed into a facility to plug in for emergency power.
I understand that, but do you say they're $200, $2,400 a piece to maintain them? That's what this contract is for, am I right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Part of the fleet, it's measuring all the generators in the county, and there's a service contract for all those.
I have a generator and I service it myself, and it doesn't cost me $2,400. Thanks. And And what's in that emergency response for $180,000? Says incidents, how does that work? Is that where you, well, what is it, I guess? What is it? It's $180,000. I'm just wondering what it is.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the big portion of that would be our dispatch agreement with St. Catharines for approximately $140,000. And our CERB contract, the 911 calling in, is approximately $35,000.
Okay. Thank you. And towers at $46,000. Is that for a new tower or maintenance? What is $46,000?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have a couple of components. One is our wireless connectivity that we have an agreement with Quick for approximately $26,000. And we have a monitoring, so our towers and communication equipment is monitored 24/7, and that's approximately $12,000 with our service provider. And we have snow clearing and grass cutting around those facilities as well.
You said Quick is $26,000?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Now, are these, any of those costs, would they be eliminated if we run this new fiber cable out that way? Or no?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd have to sit with our service provider and our IT specialist to determine that.
That'd be interesting to know, because that's going to cost a lot of money, and thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any further questions on this? Councillor Columbus, please.
Yes, do we still have more dry hydrants to put in, or is this $15,000 in the budget for dry hydrants? Is that for maintenance of the dry hydrants? Or is there any more going in?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that line items is for snow clearing, ground maintenance at the end of the spring.
Oh, I see. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Geisens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Contracted services, is that where the dispatch comes, it goes into that line, or where is it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be one of the components.
Okay, and when is that contract coming up for renewal?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that contract is up in November of this year.
Okay, so it will be tendered?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, currently, I have staff that have gone out and have done a review in, I think, 5 municipalities that offer dispatching. And the committee is just preparing a review for me now in preparation if we have to go out for a tender. And they'll give us that information.
So how will that be determined? Will that be determined by council, or will you have a report that says that we want these people, or how are you going to deal with that, I guess?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, once the committee has the report back, I'll review it and I can prepare a memo to council. There is an option in the existing contract for a 2-year option extension.
Okay, for now, thank you.
Any further discussion on this? Before we move on, just, and I think everyone's aware of it, but 4-90 at the bottom, 527,500. Again, we know that there's 292,000 in there that is the result of direction of this council on how to do our water and fire hydrant charges. If that was taken out of this equation, this budget would come in at about $237,000, roughly just under 4% increase. So that's the lion's share of this budget is Councillor Wells, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Mayor, there's nothing wrong with what you said, except if using that same logic, if I didn't have to pay my taxes, I'd have more money left over at the end of the year.
I'm not following that logic at all.
Well, that's all right. I didn't follow yours.
That's okay. Okay, thank you. But the water and wastewater budget was reduced by that amount, so it's a wash. and that's why we're equal. Emergency and Medical Services, page 4-92, 4-93, ending on 4-94. Thank you, Chief Dix, and Sarah is here, and she is ready to go. Are you ready for questions then? Thank you. And we'll just take a second and have a look through this so we can get our, a 1.6 levy requirement asked for on a $71,300 amount. Councillor Sonnenberg.
Mr. Mayor, before we get into the nitty-gritty here, I have a question. Are we any closer yet to a permanent facility for our Waterford base?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council, it is in the RFP stages. We're working with the building department, and the RFP should be out likely within the first couple weeks of February.
Are we talking about a new structure or an existing one, or what's the plan?
At the direction of Council, the RFP will be to add an additional structure on the north end of the Waterford Fire Hall that is existing.
Thank you.
The increase here is $71,300, $76,500 is salary and benefits, but any of those items are up for questioning. We'll start with Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I'm looking on page 492, and it says main budget drivers, and it says reduction in ministry funding based on projected funding level of 19,000. Well, whenever I heard information on this department, it seems to me I always heard, oh, we're going to get increased funding, or we're going to get funding for this. It's 50% of that. But is there not a limit on what they've at the start of the year? They just don't keep giving you money if you spend your share. I assume they have a limit, do they?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to defer that question to John Ford. It is my understanding we put budgetary numbers in every year, and they offer the budget amount for the next year that they're willing to cover, and then it's reconciled throughout the year.
Well, it says here reduction of 19,000. Is that what I'm reading? Over last year? Is that how
That is correct. You want an explanation why it's down? Mr.
Yeah.
Ford or Kathy, can you explain that?
Through the mayor to Councillor Breton, the estimate for 2016 is just that. It was an estimate. So by the time the ministry actually comes out with their approved funding, sometimes we've estimated a little higher or lower. So that's why there's actually a reduction in the proposed budget. But Sarah is correct that generally, they're usually behind a year. They take the the prior year's actuals and they build in a percentage. And we don't know what that percentage is that they're going to actually include from year to year. So it is just an estimate.
Okay, well, explain to me then. Here we have a 2016 budget of 8.5 million, we'll say, and we have a grant of 4.6. So is that is that 50%? How's my math? Like, is that a 50% funded program of 85 or 8.5 million?
To add, through you, Mr. Mayor, you have to add in the interdepartmental charges and the financing into the overall scheme of things. But, approximately from year to year, this runs at approximately 50%. I think it's fair to say, Kathy. There's some, minor estimation errors up or down one year to the next, but that's generally how it flows.
That's correct. And in addition, if there's a new initiative that was introduced during the year and council approves that initiative, it generally takes a year or two before the funding actually catches up for 50% of the new, to fund 50% of the new initiative.
Okay, and the other question I have here is, it says on page 492, continuation and expansion of the community paramedicine program in a state of uncertainty due to funding issues. Well, I believe I read in that when we got our last information package that that will be discontinued at the end of March. Is that accurate?
No.
No?
Sarah?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Haldeman, Norfolk, Hamilton, Brant, Lynn actually just had their board meeting on Thursday, and all the community paramedicine programs in our Lynn were requested to submit a business case, and they were all submitted to the Lynn and all approved for funding one time, continuation from March of this year for another full year, and I will be compiling a report for you and bringing it back within the next couple of weeks to council to get approval to spend the Lynn's money.
And that that won't change in that levy requirement here, in your opinion?
That is correct. The funding that we put in for covers 100% of the cost of the program, with the exception of oversight of our supervisors, and we consider that part of overseeing every paramedic in the county.
Thank you.
Any other questions on EMS? Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my question relates to the community paramedicine. And I want to look at 4-91, where Sarah's department provides its statistics. And Sarah, I know you noted for us, you reminded us of the fact that there was no program running between April and June. And I appreciate that, understand that. We're still seeing pretty strong numbers in terms of the community outreach which that program is accomplishing. And do you feel now that you've got, if you like, security for the program from March till March of 2018 now, do you see continued utilization of the paramedicine, community paramedicine program?
It is our intent to keep going on and growing the program as much as we can. We instituted a Falls Awareness Program where we went to the Senior Center in Simcoe and some of our clinics and did Falls Awareness presentations. We've also been in talks with Indwell, which is at Hamilton Hall here in Simcoe, about setting up a new wellness clinic as well. So the more that we grow the program, the more outreach we have in the community, and we're hoping that we can bridge some of that gap in the healthcare system.
I'm particularly interested in the first stat there, the social housing complexes. You ran 6 sessions there last year. Could you give us in a nutshell what kinds of things the paramedic talks about with those folks, those tenants in those facilities, and were they well received? Was there good attendance at these sessions? That's a good one. That's an important one. We have a vested interest in social housing tenants, and what were the results of those clinics or sessions?
So in the social housing complexes in Norfolk County, we actually attend clinics there once a month, and it is providing a follow-through for patients within that social housing complex to come down. There's not necessarily a formal presentation or group meeting at that time, but they're able to have a one-on-one session with our community paramedic who checks their vitals, has the ability to do blood work, updates them on their medication compliance, can speak to them about any outstanding issues, and it's been very well received across the community.
Thank you. Councillor Columbus?
Yes, Sarah, when a patient pays $45 for an ambulance ride to the hospital, where does that show up in the revenues here?
Norfolk County or Norfolk County EMS has nothing to do with actually billing for an ambulance service. That is all done through Norfolk General. And so the budgetary amount goes through them. And part of that money goes towards transfers that we may apply in and out of the hospital for taking patients from the hospital to testing, to their homes, to other hospitals.
So do we get a number as to what their revenue would be from the all the $45 trips?
We do not.
It'd be good to know what that would be once, at least once. Thanks.
Any other questions? I will then, for now, move from EMS. Thank you very much, Sarah. Oh, sorry. Well, my apologies there,
Did
Councillor
I
Brunn.
hear that right? We supply the ambulance service, yet the hospital takes the money.
That's correct.
What kind of a system's that?
You'll have to ask the province. I've asked that question for years.
Jesus.
Our vehicle, our paramedics, our responsibility, they get the cash. Councillor Columbus.
Well, I've heard it's probably cheaper to get a ride in an ambulance from Delhi to Simcoe rather than just hire a cab, so.
Sarah, thank you. I want to move on before we get any more questions like that, although it's a good one. Port Dover Harbor Marina, Janet, thank you for your patience. Good to see you. I suppose it won't be long, we'll be getting that facility rolling again, eh? Okay, good for you. Anyhow, we have everything on 496, 7, and 8, asking for an increase of 0.4% or $900 overall. Questions, Councillor Wells to Janet, please.
Very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, could Janice just speak to increased debt financing of $39,300? Who would be responsible in debt financing? What would that be for?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. It's the debt financing that would be covering the cost of some of the capital projects that had been approved previously. In the case of the marina, we're still paying for the wet hydrants and the roadway resurfacing.
But that would come out of the user fees, would it not?
Correct.
Yeah, so it's not paid for by the taxpayer.
No.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome. Councillor Black and then Height.
On that, why does it show up in the budget as an increase in the levy if what staff just said that it's not on the levy, but there it is on the levy?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Port Dover Marina, there's an expense that's inside this budget that is definitely an expense for debt financing. However, the net levy impact, this budget produces a positive net levy, so it's actually reducing the net levy, not increasing the net levy.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Height.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. Professional and consulting fees, you had a budget of $5,000 and it ended up coming in at $13,500. What was the problem there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is the cost of the valuation that was done at council's direction for the marina. It wasn't a budgetary amount that we had in there for an approved budget for 2016, but the expenditure was there.
And how much was that price tag?
Give me 1 second.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it was in the order of $5,000 to $7,000 for each of the real estate appraisal and the business valuation. Is that approximately right, Nikki?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it was $4,400 for one and $6,100 for the other.
So it's less than that.
10-5.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on the museum budget? Councillor Brunton?
The marina budget we're on, aren't we? Okay. Thank you, Mayor Luke. I just did a quick, and I kind of want to orient myself on, there's 4.5 staff there, and the salaries are $241,700, if I'm reading that right. Does that include everybody that works in that marina, this 4.53? Somebody answer that? That averages out to $53,000 per employee, and I'm just wondering, like, I know you have a manager there, who else works there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is 1 full-time permanent staff, and then there are 10 student casual summer staffing, plus another maintenance man and an office manager. But they are all seasonal employees.
But that totals to 453? 4.53?
The FTE calculation is 4.53, yes.
So I'm clear here, that includes all the part-time in there?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on then. Oh, no, Councillor Oliver, still there.
Sorry, just a very quick one that comes out of that, and I'm looking at Janet, I should know this already myself. During the summer months, say 7 days a week or Monday to Friday versus Saturday, Sunday, do we staff into the evening hours as well? So you have coverage probably from 7 or 8 a.m. until 8 or 9 p.m. in those days?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Port Dover Harbor Marina during the summer runs from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., and we are fully staffed, full-time.
Thank you. Anything else? Port Rowan Harbor Museum Marina is next. When you look at 4-102, you will see the net levy requirement, an additional $33,100. Questions on this? Councillor Black.
Well, again, I thought that this was supposed to be a money-making operation, and yet we're seeing a net levy requirement of $33,100, because we have an explanation for that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Over the past number of years, this marina has been drawing from a reserve to make it a net levy funding of 0. That reserve is now depleted, and this is now the cost that is hitting the levy to operate that marina.
Thank you.
Councillor Height.
Mayor Luca, I was wondering if we could have a look at the interdepartmental charges. $22,000 worth? Seems pretty high when we have 0.72 FTEs in there.
Sorry, yeah, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are finance charges of $10,200, clerk's administration charges of $100, insurance charges of $9,400, and human resource charges of $1,900.
Does that clicky thing work over there?
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further on this? Councillor Black.
Yeah. Is this what we should be expecting in the future, is to have a net levy requirement from this marina like every year from now on? Or will it be at some point self-sustaining again?
Any thoughts, Mr. Cridlin?
Through the chair, as Port Rowan Harbor Marina reports directly to myself, I have had some pre-talks with Councillor Height, and I think it's the way that we move forward. User fees could be looked at. There probably is more money that can be generated from this marina, and those are options that staff will have to look at and bring back to see if we can close that gap on what the levy is paying to keep this facility going.
Thank you.
Okay. Columbus?
Yes, Bill, has Impact gone in? I heard something they were going in to reassess some of those buildings in the marina there.
Through the chair, the boathouses, Councillor?
Right, boathouses.
I haven't heard that. I'm not sure if Councillor Height has heard anything, but it's something I can look into with the finance people or people in the county and maybe get back to you on that. Haven't heard anything myself.
Okay, I heard that, so I'm not 100% sure.
Anything else on the Port Rowan Harbor Marina? I'm going to keep going. We'll go to RIDE now. There are some data on 4-105 and some explanations on 4-104. Councillor Brunton, I'll start with you.
Well, first, thank you, Mayor Luke. First off, through you to staff, I asked that question earlier this morning about the additional cost to run the new contractor for whatever period of time that was. I'd like that answer first.
Thank you, Nikki.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. For the interim operation of Ride Norfolk, we're looking at about $23,000 more than it would have been with the Donnelly operator over last year.
Okay, so that 23,000 should be added here. Am I safe to say that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would depend on how the tender happens when we do tender the service out. once the interim
Well-
contract is up, and we don't know what the costs are going to be. So yes, it probably is something that should be added into the budget.
So I'm assuming if we add 23, we know that's a fixed cost, rough fixed cost. And if we even got the same price as our contractor that went out of business, we're still at an increase of 23,000, roughly. That's my math anyways. Now, I did see the county manager's memo about increased funding. Is that? Oh, not this year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just, it was a news release that I caught wind of this morning, and it doesn't, it's typical of the province, but yeah, it doesn't take effect till 2019, but it was just to make sure that people realize there was some good news on the horizon for municipal transit services, and that the province would be increasing the gas tax allocated to municipalities for transit. And so, sorry, I didn't mean for that to be misleading. It was just to make sure that, everybody was aware there's better things ahead.
We hope. Okay, so right now, the net levy is, I'm going to say 100 grand, and we were going to add 23 to it. And I assume that's all going to be levy? That minor increase, is that? So I realize we provide a service here, but I'm starting to wonder, and I know transportation is a losing cause, but I just kind of wonder where we're going. Thank you.
You, Councillor Wells?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I did hear the county manager suggest that some good news was coming, and I think if I read this budget correctly, we could use some good news. Because if I see this net levy proportion, we're looking at $45,000 that the taxpayer is having to pick up for this. And this is in the good days when we had the previous provider. My chances are that the new provider, there will be extra cost. So that's not good news for anyone.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it's a prudent comment, and I wouldn't want to be overly optimistic, but perhaps Mr. Cridlin or Nikki could comment, but I understood that, as we get ready to go out to re-tender on this, there may be, perhaps more than a couple, maybe 3 or 4 parties that may be interested in bidding. And so, one would at least be optimistic that if we, receive 3 or 4 bids, that there'll be some good competitive bidding there. And again, not to be overly optimistic, but let's hope that that becomes a good news story later.
Bill?
I was just going to say through the chair, Keith's comments are 100% correct. Tendering for this before, nobody knew what the service was. The service is well established. We have the South Coast in the summertime, which is a great success. There are up to 4 or 5 companies looking at this. I can't say what their bids would be, but I think it's going to be competitive and tight, and I'll be quite surprised if we see them come in higher than what we were paying for at the minimum. Lots of interest.
Councillor Wells?
Mr. Mayor, certainly we'll look forward to the competitive pricing. And my question to you, Mr. Mayor, is after we look at these competitive prices, we still have the option as to what to do, whether we accept it or not.
Correct. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Geisens, and then I have a comment.
Well, one of the things that when we first went into this division, we talked about less gas tax and more levy. Can you tell me why that has to happen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to defer that one over to Mr. Ford.
Mr. Ford, to comment on that question?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, when we started out, we got a pretty substantial chunk of funding from gas tax. And that's because we were new and they didn't have a history to deal with in terms of what the percentage of funding would be. The funding envelope is tied to what the tax or what the local taxpayer, the tax-supported envelope is. And it's a formula. We aren't getting as much gas tax money as we had initially anticipated. Excuse me. But we were lucky in having had a good advance payment, or a good startup payment. That's a better choice of words. A good startup funding, and so we were able to withstand some of the increases. But we're now at a point where we're in their regular funding formula, and it's a little. It's lower than what we had anticipated when we started out.
Okay, so now I'm looking at this, and the total expenditures there is $680,100, and of that, from what I gather here under financial charges or revenues, investment income, we're now going to be getting $13,500 from the province as far as gas tax?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, the gas tax funding is actually on the net financing line of $125,000. The $13,500 under the external recoveries, or under the other financial, is actually sponsorships for the South Coast Shuttle.
And what it also does is 0.20 of a FTE, I guess is the, why is that, why are we having a, I guess, that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, with the position of the Ride Norfolk coordinator, within the restructuring that has been happening within CSD, Brad has been given a number of other job duties, and the wages for that is in another area within the budget.
So it doesn't come out of this division? Is that what you're telling me now, that 0.20?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the full one-year wage used to come out of the Ride Norfolk budget, but 20% of his wages now go out of another budget within CSD.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The Councillor Broughton.
Just one last question. If we wait, we open the tenders, we get something we're not satisfied with, and we were to scrap this whole thing, would that gas tax totally disappear? I guess my question to John, or does it just go back in the reserve? Would we continue to get the same, or would it be cut off?
Can I get you to say that again, because I missed
Okay.
the front end of that, what you said.
Well, there's the gas tax in there now, correct? 125,000, the way I read it. And if we were to scrap the program, period, does that 125 totally disappear from the province, or does it just still come to us and we put it in a reserve?
It's based upon what it costs to provide the transit service. So if the transit service was eliminated, then the funding would be eliminated.
Okay, so there's other applicable areas for gas tax in our budget?
Not for the Ontario government gas tax. The
Federal.
Ontario government gas tax is associated with transit. The federal government gas tax is associated with infrastructure funding, and it's continuing.
All right, so
the federal side.
It's a total goodbye for the provincial gas tax.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, and maybe you can help me with this, Council. How long has this service now been in the county? Is it about 5 years from 20? About five. And again, we discussed it once before. There may come a day down the road as these costs rise, and we may have to consider a slight increase in user fee. $2 to take a bus one way from Delhi to Simcoe, or Waterford to Simcoe, or Port Rowan, etc. It's pretty reasonable, and that's the whole idea of the program. But having said that, when I put my $2 in the box, the taxpayers are subsidizing that along with the provincial federal money. So anyhow, that's something I'm not suggesting this year, but we may want to think about. After 6 years, if it went from $2 to 2.25, do the math. It's reasonable anyhow. Go ahead, yeah.
Through the chair, I was going to say, staff have discussed too raising fees at one point, and I know it came up with the user fees, and I think Councillor Height caught the comment, it was an issue administratively, and it was going from a $2 ride with a 2% increase to $2.01 kind of thing. So what I'm saying is, if there is thought around the table, if we get through the tendering process, we would probably need to know shortly after council's wishes, and then staff could work on that, because there are other
That's a good
options
idea.
of pass cards and prepaid that the change hasn't got to be made. So we'd like to know that ahead of time, if
Okay.
it's a great user fee to put up, but there's some things to put in place before we do it.
Okay, and just to finish up on my concern, I think that's excellent. I think it's something Brad certainly would be on top of, and different ways to collect the revenue and the prices. Councillor Height?
By early enough, do you assume right now? Because I'll move the motion right now to increase those fees.
Even before we get the tender, you're suggesting we raise the fees?
Sure.
You want to make that a motion?
Yep, $3.
To how much?
Raise the fee up to $3.
$2 to $3? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to, I know Councillor Oliver, I have you down, but I'm going to, that motion is now on the floor. I'm going to open it for debate. Councillor Black.
Just wondered what the overall impact of raising it to $3 would be. Like, how much more revenue would we be generating?
Should
to
increase
staff?
our revenue 50%, but then again, the amount of users may go down. So to staff, that's a good question. I don't know.
Through the chair, I mean, council has that right to do that. I would like to consult with Brad, and because we have our in-town and our out-of-town, and I'm not sure of what percentage our in-town is versus out-of-town and what that increase would be. And then if council's looking at the out-of-town rate as well and a few things. Council could today, I would like to have consult with Brad Smith and the team here and get back to council very quickly on this, if that's the...
Could we defer the motion pending that additional information coming back to us?
You can certainly defer.
Defer it.
You're putting motion on defer. Well, the deferral motion then takes precedent. Do you have a time limit on the deferral, or?
Bill? How much
It's
time
up
would
to you. I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I could have something for next Tuesday night. We just have to get the ridership, and I think we can do that, yeah.
Okay, until then.
Okay. Okay, to the deferral. Councillor Wells.
Mr. Mayor, I'll be supporting the deferral. I wish that we had, instead of making it next week, that we have suggested that we wait until we hear what is happening with the tender, because that makes a major difference, Mr. Chair. There's no point of us suggesting that we would increase the fee by $1 if, when we get the tender, that's not even in the ballpark figure. So if we're going to defer it, why don't we wait and get all of the information before we make a decision?
I'll take that as a friendly amendment, as part of my amendment.
So your amendment would be to defer it until after we get the contract settled?
Yes.
The proposals, yeah. Okay, to the deferral again, Councillor Brunton and then Height, please.
Your Worship, I have no problem with the deferral. I just want to make sure we're adding 23,000 to this, are we not?
We what?
We're adding 23,000 to the.
Well, let me
budget.
finish with the deferral, and then we'll get to that part, because, okay, let me deal with the deferral, and then we'll answer your question. Councillor Height, to the deferral?
Mayor Luke, I'm a bit confused on the timing. So we're going to send it out for tender to get a new price, yet we're on the hook right now for 120 days moving forward, no?
Right.
For the service?
Oh, well, we have another service in place for 90 days.
Pardon me?
I believe we have another service in place for 90 days.
Right, so
correct? Yes.
when will we be issuing a tender?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have the deadline or the timelines, but the 120-day extension, we worked out that the tender, it would be closed within the 120 days. Within the 120 days, we'll have our new provider, we'll have that information.
So if it comes in at 110 days, that gives you 10 days to figure out the price increase. And really, with my motion, I felt I was just supporting the option of, are we interested in increasing the price? So deferral on $1, I don't know. I'm not going to support that.
For my clarification, was the provider that's there temporary, we'll say at the moment. Is that 120 or 90?
120 days.
Then I won't say 90 anymore. I was understanding it was 90. I will say 120. Councillor Wells?
Mr. Mayor, and I understand exactly what Councillor Height has suggested, that, you know, we talk about a dollar increase, what's the problem? But a dollar increase represents a pretty sizable increase to the people that we are trying to serve. So why, I mean, we've waited this long, surely we can wait to get the tender so we make an informed decision rather than rush into things. There's no immediate hurry now. So I leave my motion on the floor.
Well, your deferral is still on the floor, and Mr. Clerk, would you read the deferral? Just want to be clear on the wording of the until it comes in or after the new contract, please.
That the user fee motion for Ride Norfolk be deferred to coincide with the consideration of a new contract.
Okay. Any further discussion on the deferral? If not, those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those opposed? Okay, thank you. That it will be deferred. You want to vote on the motion as no, it's deferred. It's done. Thank you. It's not an amendment. Okay, thank you very much. Ride Norfolk still, page 4-105. Councillor Oliver.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I
and then you.
apologize if this one got asked already when I was doing some number crunching here, but the fact that we're experiencing this reduction in our gas tax funding, I understand that it can fluctuate year to year. Is the reduction a result of the fact that last year our expense was down from the year before and therefore we needed less gas tax, and that's the number you then use in the subsequent year's budget? I want to be sure if I'm understanding this correctly, that it's not simply that the province is letting us have less, it's letting us have less because we've shown in a previous year that we used less, and this year's allocation is based on their estimates from previous year's consumption. That's what I'm asking for some guidance on.
Through the chair, can we look at the other side of the room for that answer?
Yeah. That's all right.
Okay. Mr. Ford, do you have a response?
We may have to get back to council on that because I'm a little fuzzy in terms of what the formula looks like. But my recollection is that it's tied not to what the cost is, but it's tied to what the municipal tax levy is. And I'm not sure I have to have a look at the formula again. And as I said, I'm a little fuzzy on what it looks like. In terms of what happens if the municipal tax levy goes up or goes down, how does that affect the subsidy? But it is tied to the, it's tied to the amount of money that we are providing to the transit operation, not the cost of it. Theoretically, the cost and the subsidy and the council contribution should be following some regular, percentage changes, but the formula, is my recollection is that it's tied to what the amount of the tax funding is, not how much the gross cost is.
Okay.
Okay, and I have to get back to you on that because, as I said, I'm a little fuzzy on it, and I don't want to, put a hard stake in the ground and say that's
Okay.
exactly what it is.
Councillor Oliver?
Yeah, thank you for that. That is different than my recollection, Mr. Mayor, because I'll defer obviously to the treasurer. He knows better than I, but unfortunately, given that being the case, there may very well come a point where even somebody like myself, who's been an ardent supporter of Ride Norfolk from day one, we may find at some point, if the province isn't continuing to increase its share along with us as the cost of the service goes up, we may not at some point be able to, or we may choose not to be able to afford it. So I look forward with interest to hearing him get back to us on how this funding formula works.
Thank you. Mr. County Manager?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I believe certainly what's been announced indicates that the the basis of the funding will provide more latitude to municipalities and should enable municipalities to, if necessary, invest in infrastructure, look at more routes, extended hours, fare strategies, and improving accessibility, those sorts of things. So, again, it is one of those things that, unfortunately, you'd like a very simple, straightforward funding formula. And, as Mr. Ford indicated, sometimes, those things start out really just looking at helping to address a part of the municipal subsidy or what's funded from the levy. Obviously, that's impacted by what you charge in fares, and obviously you may want to provide incentive to certain rider target groups or other things. So hopefully there's more latitude coming and better ability to design a transit service that meets the needs of people and addresses local circumstances.
Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Two things. One, I asked this before. It looks like we got a guaranteed 120-day contract on an interim basis, and that I think I heard that's going to cost us $23,000 estimated. So I think that has to be put back in. In my opinion, it does. Now, the other thing, if I recall, is there not $8,000 in here for bus shelters? And if we're going to defer this whole thing till we get a new contract, if we get a new contract that's economical, I really don't want to start putting bus shelters in and stuff out there until we know what we're doing for sure. So I would say if we take $23,000 that we should add, because we got in this dilemma with the contractor now, and take off $8,000, what's that bring us down to? About 15? Is that what it'll do your math? So I say we add $15,000 to the budget and bite the bullet.
The shelters and that was approved with the capital budget.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, Bill, you could speak to this, but I think, and so you raise a good question, a great point, that I would think it's fair to say that we wouldn't be putting any benches or shelters in until 120 days. Would that be a fair statement? We're not.
No, that's a fair statement.
I think that's fair to be the summer
we have
months.
some time on that, yes.
Okay, and now, a question through to Mr. Ford and Kathy. Should we be adding 15,000 to this levy portion of this budget this time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I use the word prudent quite often. So to me, it would be prudent to do that. However, we don't know when the new contract's coming in, whether it will be the same dollar value as the old contract or whether it will be higher or lower or whatever's going on. So it's a bit kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. It's hard to, sometimes it's hard to hit them. But to be prudent, to be on the safe side, conservative, yes, we should do that.
And I'm not debating, obviously, but for clarification, I think Mr. Brunton is saying it's the 120 days we know it's a higher cost to operate. And there is where that 15 will say 23 less the 8.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yep.
So, we can put it in by a motion, just like we need a motion to take it out.
Well, I say I'll make a motion to put the 15 in, and that will include a hold on any of these bus shelters, because that money shouldn't be spent for now. And if we get a cheaper price, we're money ahead. If not, it may cost us more. So that's my motion.
Motion then to add 15 to the bottom line here,
and
that staff be aware that they're to put a hold right now on the capital portion for capital improvements. Discussion on that motion. Councillor Height.
Sir, Mayor Luke, could you read that? Was that an increase of 15,000?
A 15,000 an increase. That's because in these figures here on page 4-105, the increase right now that we're spending on the replacement service provider is estimated to be that much net of about 15,000, that we are going to be definitely taking that hit, that increase, until we get a new contract in place.